Hello, everyone. Welcome to Live from Hong Kong. This is our very special series. We're going to show you again our card so that you can see who is our guest today. We have a very special episode of Live from Hong Kong. Learn from HKU experts about the COVID-19 pandemic. Music for hope and healing. Our special guest is speaker and Professor Daniel Chua. He's the chair professor of music and the Mr. and Mrs. Hung Hing Ying Professor in the Arts. You'll be meeting him in just a few minutes. This is part of our very special series. HKU COVID-19 is the hashtag HKU University. We're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and our website is fightcovid19.hku.hk. Please submit your questions using the hashtag HKU COVID-19 and our email address fightcovid19@hku.hk. Please tell us where you're watching from. We have a global audience for this series and we're just honored to have you all here. Please tag your friends right now. Please hit share right now and tell us where you're watching from. We're going to talk about how music can be used for hope and healing. Please tag your friends and please hit share, retweet. We want this to be a chance for you to bring in your friends and family and colleagues from around the world. Hello, everyone. It's 9 p.m. in Hong Kong, not 2 p.m. in London, and 9 a.m. right here in New York City. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. Welcome to this live global conversation about the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm honored to moderate this conversation brought to you by the University of Hong Kong. This is part of a series for everyone to learn about the coronavirus from different angles, and also to learn from all the great work that's been happening in the region, the best practices that we can bring to the entire planet. In the last episode, we spoke to Professor Douglas Arner about coronavirus and fintech. Today, we'll be discussing coronavirus from a very different lens. We'll be talking with Professor Daniel Chua about how music can help us move past this pandemic, and also to think about the fight for racial and social justice all over the world, especially here in America, and how people can use music to help us move forward, to help us heal, and to give us hope. Professor Chua is the chair professor of music and the Mr. and Mrs. Hung Hing Ying Professor in the Arts at the University of Hong Kong. He's the president of the International Musicology Society, a global association of researchers in all aspects of music, founded in 1927. Professor Chua earned his PhD in musicology at Cambridge University and has taught and conducted research at many distinguished institutions around the world, including Cambridge, King's University, King's College London, Yale, and Harvard. He's written widely on music and is particularly known for his work on Beethoven and the intersection between music, philosophy, and theology. We'll get into all of those topics, I'm sure, based on your questions and comments. Here are some of the books that he's published: Beethoven and Freedom, Absolute Music and the Construction of Meaning, and the Glisten Quartets of Beethoven. We're showing you here the books that he has published. We're just so grateful to have Professor here. Let me bring him on so he can say hi. Hello.
Hi, it's great to be here.
How are you doing? That's our first question for all our guests. How's your family?
Yes, no, doing very well. The kids, thankfully, have been able to go back to school, although ironically, with all the social distancing at the school, they prefer the kind of online version of school. But life is ticking on and is getting slightly back to normal.
As we know, for those of us in America, we were watching the crisis unfold in East Asia, at the very beginning in China, and then all over, Southeast Asia and Asia. And then we were thinking that the problem's over there. And then suddenly America became the epicenter and New York became the epicenter of the epicenter. And so we are trying to learn from Hong Kong and the region, because so many important ways of handling the epidemic has come from the folks who are in Hong Kong and other places. What is this affecting the sense of what's happening in Hong Kong itself and at the university?
Well, obviously, our hearts are really thinking very much about you in New York, everyone in America. I think it's a very difficult situation. In fact, I wrote the book, Beethoven and Freedom, is really about these types of situations where we find ourselves in moments where we have to exercise some kind of freedom. But what does it actually mean? What's the responsible way of doing that? And Beethoven has some interesting lessons, actually, in the way he composes music and talks about what it means to be heroic, what it means to be humble, what it means to be resigned, and what it means to be determined. So these are very testing times for all of us, I think.
And they certainly are, and that's certainly one of the things that we're thinking about here, sitting in America, as there, it feels to us like America's on fire at the moment, and the pain that people are feeling here is real. And music has always been used as a medium for sharing and crying out. And we've seen that obviously in popular music, but also classical music has a way of connecting and bringing people together. So we'll be talking about that and a lot more with you, Professor. So thank you so much for your time. I do want to ask, how is it going in terms of your own classes and your students?
Well, it's very hard teaching online, but I have to say, they work really, really hard. And so, yeah, they're doing pretty well. And we're getting to a stage actually of marking now. So I think they're more nervous about what I think of their work than they are actually about producing it.
Yeah, so we always find that students are resilient, and we continue to hope that they will be able to work through everything. Where are you in your college academic year right now, and when do things open and close and all of that, please?
Well, we're coming really towards the end. We finished, as you heard, the teaching bit of the semester, and the students have handed in their work, and now we're really in the stage of marking. And I think next week will be an examiners meeting. So that's where we are.
All right. So I think we're ready to do what we like to think of kind of our global tour of people watching. Everyone, tell us where you're watching from. Go into your comments if you're watching on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or even LinkedIn. Tell us where you're watching from, and we will read your comments. So I think we have a couple of comments that have already come in as people are saying hello. We call this kind of our global tour. Linda's watching from Long Island. Let's see who else is here with us right now. Sujana says hello. She's a doctor popping in and out between seeing patients. So we want to make sure that the doctor gets some good insights and also some thoughts that can help her as she's doing actual healing. We're talking about music doing healing. Linda Lawrence says, we'll definitely look for this book. Thank you. There you go, Professor. We're also helping sell your book. That's great. We saw some more. Rosemary Aquilina is here, folks. I want the professor and everybody to know this is a hero of mine. Judge Rosemary Aquilina is the judge who presided over the Larry Nassar USA gymnastics scandal, which made worldwide headlines. As you may know, the doctor who was the advisor to the gymnastics team of the US abused women and girls for decades and got away with it. And this was the judge who not only presided over it and put him away for a very long time, but also gave those women a chance to speak and testify and gave them voice. So we're very grateful to her for being here. And she says music is very healing. I always played music to soothe my children when they were babies. So excited to hear this. Watching from Michigan, always great to hear you. So Professor, we have such interesting people watching. Let's see some more. Anil's watching from Mumbai. Hi, Anil. Thank you for being here. Ron Thomas is watching from Dubai. Ron is a great friend of mine, and we're so happy to have him. Margaret Chen's watching from Singapore, and Janet's watching from Murdoch, Minnesota. And Minnesota is at the epicenter, not of the pandemic, but the pain that we're feeling. As you know, Professor, Minneapolis is where George Floyd was killed and very tragically is no longer with us, and his death has resulted in the unrest all over the United States. And also we've seen in other countries, right? We've seen people getting together and saying racial and social justice is so important. So let's go to some of the questions we have for you, Professor, in terms of what is the power of classical music? Can you talk about that, and how do we make sure that it is relevant in today's age?
Well, all music is powerful, not just classical music, of course, but I happen to work mostly on classical music. And for me, classical music is really about what music can speak over long distances of time. You know, the idea of classical is something that, if I were to ask Beethoven, do you write classical music? He would say, well, what are you talking about? Because in his day, he was just writing modern music. So classical music is a retrospective term. And it's a way of saying, look, we're all modern people. That means we're all up to date. That means we all live according to the fashion, according to trends. But what can last all these trends? What can outlast fashion? And so we coined this term classical to speak of music that can speak despite all the changes that happen over time. They still speak to us today. So for me, classical music is always relevant because it carries these very big existential questions with it. And when I listen to classical music, often it's a kind of time travel back to the time, say, of Haydn. I'm listening to his music, to his time. But of course, nobody would write that kind of music today. But when I listen to the music of the past, suddenly it speaks to the present in some way. So classical music is relevant because it teaches us to listen to the past. It teaches us to listen to the very big questions about life. And it teaches us to listen to difference, because music is different from us now. This is music of a long time ago. So it's not now, and it's not about me. So this is what classical music does. It teaches us to listen to music carefully.
I loved how you described kind of talking to Beethoven, because I know you do. People who are scholars of great, creators of the past are always in dialogue with the people they study. We have people who study Shakespeare, for example, and they're always talking to Shakespeare. And I know you're talking to Beethoven. And I also like the idea that if you asked him, he'd say, I'm creating music. Like people, we joke that in India, people don't say, I'm going to have Indian food. We just say, we're going to have food, right? So it's all context in that way. We use the word musicology. Can you describe what that means to our audience, please?
Oh, musicology is just the study of music. It's the study of any music in any way that you want. So it could be historical, it could be anthropological or ethnographical, it could be from a psychological perspective or a philosophical one or theological one, whatever you want, really. So I class as musicologist anybody who studies music in a scholarly way.
And do you distinguish between the kinds of music? So your association, by the way, it's amazing that you're the president of the organization. Do you have different subsections or interest groups or chapters? How do you do that?
We do have different interest groups and so on, but my emphasis has been that music is music everywhere, and we should treat that equally. So it's not just about Western music or classical music or this method or that method. All music counts, because all music is very interesting to think about and to talk about. And we need to have open borders when we do our kind of research rather than closed borders. Music should open out to the world and not close it in.
And that's a very good point for us to think about today, as there's so much pain that people are going through. If you're just joining us, we're in conversation with Professor Daniel Chua, who is a world-renowned expert in music, Western classical music, all kinds of music. And he's the president of the International Musicology Society, a global association of researchers in all aspects of music that was founded in 1927. How are the conventions and conferences? Are there like a big party or serious or a mix? What are music researchers like?
Well, for our society, we have one big party every 5 years. So we move at a glacial pace. But of course, nothing really happened this year because of the pandemic. So we've just had all kinds of Zoom gatherings, as it were. But yeah, when we get together, we have a lot of fun. Of course, we're musicians, we're musicologists. We always have a great time.
And you must have obviously amazing music also that you all play and bring together.
Great music, of course. Great music and great conversations. And we try to have great food as well.
I'm sure. And so when is the next gathering of the big event is what year?
The big gathering is going to be in 2022 in Athens. That's going to be a great meeting. What a wonderful place to talk about music.
We have comments coming in from all over. I see Lisa says, I love this perspective and loves hearing from you. I see my dad is watching in Kerala, India. So hi, Dad. We appreciate you being with us, and I get to see you this way. As Professor said, we don't get to travel the way we used to. I'm sure the Professor was on a plane all the time. How's your home situation now that you're at home? Tell us about that.
Well, now that I'm at home, I can actually spend more time with the kids and my lovely wife. So actually, it's been a very nice time. We've eaten together much more, and I keep thinking about food all the time. In fact, it's been a very good thing. But also during this time, I found myself thinking a lot more about music, and I decided to make some, videos and stuff like that, not just to keep me off the streets, but because I think there are important things that music has to say during this time of pandemic.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those videos, and we're going to show some of those clips as well. My mom is watching, so I love seeing her here as well and being with us. Linda Lawrence says, during the crisis of the past few months, I've been listening to a lot of Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi. Finding a lot of healing in the order manifested by this type of music helps me with my daily life. So if I may put you on the spot, what is the difference between these three these three musicians, these three composers, that we can understand that she picked those three and the order she talks about?
Well, first of all, they were all born in the same year, so good choice. But yeah, the Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi are great Baroque composers. Vivaldi actually is an amazing composer. He has so much drive and energy. This is, he had red hair, he was an Italian, and if you listen to his music, I'm sure you all know the Four Seasons. That music is incredibly creative, and it has this way of just moving towards these cadences. Bach was very excited by Vivaldi's music. In fact, he found it very exciting. And so Bach learned a lot about building these structures, tonal structures, from Vivaldi. And of course, Handel is a great composer that moved from the German-speaking lands to Britain, and the composer of great choral music in particular. And he's really the composer that was, in fact, the most famous composer at the end of the 18th century. They had forgotten about Bach and Vivaldi, and Handel had the greatest influence, and particularly the Handelian style, that great kind of sublime, sort of very grand Baroque style that a lot of people imitated, including Beethoven.
And so that's so interesting that some names that might seem bigger now were not the stars of their day, right? This is all kind of the ebbs and flows of time over time as well.
Reception history is always interesting. I mean, Bach was really famous after Beethoven in a funny way, because Mendelssohn revived the Matthew's Passion, and then there was a Bach revival. But before that, his son, CPE Bach, was in fact the more famous Bach, and in many ways a very influential Bach, also on Beethoven and other composers like Haydn and Mozart.
So I'm you're talking to a layman here. So there was more than one Bach, and the junior Bach was the more famous, but then the Bach, Daddy Bach, became more famous over the centuries. Talk about that, please.
Right, it's a very complicated story, but yeah, basically Bach was out of fashion by the time he died. He lived a long life. His music was regarded as a little bit too cerebral, a little bit too turgid, some people used to say. But his son wrote very different music. CPE Bach in particular was very well known, particularly as a keyboard player, and music that was very emotive and very whimsical and wonderful music. And so he was far more famous than his dad. And then it took really, into the late 1820s, 1830s for J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, to come back. There's a kind of revival because Mendelssohn, who had converted to Protestantism and very much wanted to be in that sort of Lutheran line, was very interested in Bach's music and put on this fantastic performance in Leipzig of the Matthew Passion that drew massive crowds and very important people. And that really started a revival of Daddy Bach, as it were.
Daddy Bach. Please forgive me. Sounds like a pop culture reference from today, but thank you for letting me say that. We're watching a conversation with Professor Daniel Chua, HKU COVID-19. Please make sure you tell us where you're watching from, and we are going to give you a chance to watch a couple of videos that the professor has made during this time. and you made them by yourself. Typically, professors have teams of people helping you. So talk about these videos. Why did you decide to make them, and what was the reasoning behind it? I want to remind everyone to follow us on Facebook, HKU100. On Twitter, it's at HKU University. The hashtag is HKU COVID-19, and the website is fightcovid19.hku.hk. This effort is to have a global conversation around the pandemic and using different ways to come to that. We talked about fintech, we talked about masks and the value of understanding the pandemic from different angles. We also talked about distance learning and how that's affecting the professors. So all of these are in the archive, so please do check them out. And let's go back to Professor Chua. Tell us, please, about the videos you made, and we can play a couple of them here.
Well, with your phone, you can actually do quite interesting things. I wanted to record myself giving a kind of new format for me anyway, some, not really lectures, but some kind of sharing about what I thought would be helpful at this time of COVID-19. And I also thought this might be a good format to speak to a broader audience, because a lot of my work, is basically incomprehensible. My wife always says I'm totally incomprehensible, and that's just usually at breakfast. But when she reads my work, she says, no, this is not comprehensible. So I thought, let's do something that really speaks to a wider audience. So I made a couple of videos, one on Schubert and one on Beethoven, and I just set myself the question: what kind of music would be appropriate now during this time of COVID-19? What music would speak to us, not so much entertain us, but speak to us about some of the issues that we're facing at this time?
All right, so shall we play one of them? So tell us this video that's coming up. Tell us what we'll be seeing, and I believe we're ready to see the video.
Yeah, this is on Opus 110, Sonata by Beethoven.
Yeah. Okay, so we will come to that in just a second. Folks, you're watching this video from Hong Kong University, and we are going to play the video on Beethoven in just a second. Please make sure you tag your friends. Please hit share right now so people all over can join us. We are so grateful to Professor Daniel Chua. He mentioned his family while we're waiting for the video, in case it comes in while we're talking. Is the fact you said you are loving the extra time with the family? Has your family ever said, we hope you'll get back on a plane soon?
No, they missed me. I used to travel quite a lot, actually. And so I think it's actually nice to be back. Because they're teenagers, so they do spend a lot of time in front of screens in their room, not just on online school, but on video games as well. So it's not that I see them all the time. But it's good to spend some time with them and just, talk to them about all kinds of things, because this is very serious times that we are in. And
how old are they, may I ask?
One is 15 and one is 13.
Okay, I have two 17-year-olds, so we're in a different even in those few years, there's of different stages, as you know. We've got a comment from Minnie, who's watching, says, "Hi Daniel, this is Minnie from HKU. Which composer's works would you think is the most healing? Someone once said Bach's music could be sold in the pharmacy."
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do find Mozart, particularly the piano concertos, very. I don't know what the word is, healing, or it's not really just soothing, but there's something about this music that puts this huge, delightful smile in my heart, actually. I think the theologian Karl Barth always talks about Mozart as a composer that is able to express the dark side of life, but in a way that brings great joy. There's a kind of playfulness in Mozart that I think brings a great deal of healing. Bach, of course, partly because this is always, in some sense, sacred music. Even his secular music is really sacred. It always brings that sense of the divine in, that there is an order to this world, a structure that we live in, that we can find meaning in, and that you can always hear that in Bach. And I think, of course, I work on Beethoven, and particularly late Beethoven. To me, the music of late Beethoven really deals with many of the most critical issues head on, and he's always able to find a way of transcending suffering and pain without minimizing the suffering that he's going through and some of the issues that he's struggling with.
Yeah, Minnie says, yeah, love to hear more about Mozart. Thank you so much. And Lisa says Mozart is one of my favorites. Let's talk about that a little bit. You know, in the world of the arts, I used to be the chief digital officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There were a few kind of like rock stars. You can imagine, you know, names like Picasso, Monet, Rembrandt, Da Vinci. All of those names are things that people know in the public, and there's kind of a competition about who's the most popular in that sense. What is it like in the world of classical music, and what is the pantheon of the greatest names that people should know? And I'll ask you a little later, who should be elevated to that pantheon?
Well, the idea of classical music is all about that pantheon. Who gets to get their name on that concert hall, on the ceiling of the concert hall. Beethoven is always, because he was so big in the 19th century, always in the middle, as the middle name in the concert hall with a big bust of Beethoven. And of course, everybody was trying in a way to be in his lineage. So people invented Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven as the so-called classical composers. And then, of course, everybody was fighting to say, well, I want to be there too. So, Brahms would fight and Wagner would fight. We all come from that tradition. So actually, we're not dealing with a history of music when we talk about this pantheon. We're just dealing with this kind of lineage of greats. Of course, there are many other composers that we never talk about very much for whatever reason. Why are there only 3 classical composers, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, in the late 18th, early 19th century? What happened to all the other composers? There can't just be 3 composers, right? So we have to be a little bit careful when we try to have our great pantheon, because it also means that we miss out on a lot of other music that was there. And we always say, it's all about Beethoven symphonies and all that. But actually, people were really interested in choral works, in operas and other chamber music. So there's a very rich history, and we should be careful not just to have the pantheon. We need to have a much broader view of all the music that is being made, and to have a greater understanding of that context.
And here, Apollo says Aretha Franklin was a surprising opera breakout star, and so trying to connect those different worlds. Mark Lee's watching from Durham, North Carolina, and says hello. Have you been to North Carolina?
Yes, I have actually. I've been to Durham. I've been to is it pronounced Raleigh? I don't know how to pronounce it, but yeah, no. I've been to Duke. Visited.
What are your memories of America? And when you're watching America on fire at this moment and all the pain you see, how do you relate to that?
I love America. I mean, I visited so many times. I was in universities there as a visiting lecturer and fellow. So it's a wonderful place. I've always felt America to be a place that is sort of torn between extremes, and I always felt that I've always had a slightly different view of America, because I'm an academic, so I sort of hang around with academics. So I was very surprised by the things that are happening in the last few years in the States, and seeing the whole society being torn up like this is actually heartbreaking for me, because I have very happy and wonderful memories of the States, and it's great academic institutions, great places of learning, great ideas. And at the moment, it seems that these ideas and so on are not bringing the country together.
And that's certainly one of the things that we worry about here, and we're talking about how music can heal. So we're ready with our clips. So let's go to our first video. You're going to talk about the amplification of friendship through the darkest moments is the idea of this video. Talk about that, and then we'll play it.
Right, so this is a clip from my last video, which is on Beethoven's Piano Sonata, Opus 110, because this is a sonata where Beethoven sort of composes in that kind of breathing difficulty. The music is having asthmatic spasms. So to me, this is a music that really spoke to this time when people are needing ventilators. And he goes through this music, and when it comes to the end of this piece of music, he's able to really breathe in this very large phrase. And it seems to me that the music is all about breathing difficulties and then breathing out spaces of hospitality. And he begins this sonata with a very strange expression mark, con amiabilita, with amiability, with friendship, with hospitality. So this is a sonata that is trying to welcome people in.
All right.
The entire sonata is about the amplification of friendship, even through the darkest moments. And structurally speaking, Beethoven does just that. He takes the first 4 bars, the motto theme, and he amplifies it. First, it becomes a longer phrase, and then it becomes more and more capacious as it builds into larger sections. Beethoven is taking in more and more air. He is creating a breathing space. He is giving time to welcome the stranger and to create that space for friendship.
Wow, very, very nice. Tell me about that music, and which rendition is that?
Oh, that was me. With all these copyright and permission issues, I have to find music that I can play myself so I don't get into any trouble. So that's me playing in the background while I was talking, as it were.
And you did all that by yourself. I loved it. You even had a little special effects going on. I think we all want to listen to more. I was hoping behind you, we're just looking at your desk. Tell us what's on your desk right there.
This is the autograph, a facsimile autograph of Beethoven's Opus 110 piano sonata.
Oh wow! What a magical document! And what do you have on the stand behind you? Further behind you.
Bach. You always have to have Bach somewhere, right? Otherwise, you don't get any structure in your life. You have some Bach, some Beethoven. It keeps you sort of grounded and happy.
Oh, thank you so much. We've got lots of people watching from around the world. Folks, please tag your friends. Please share. We've got more videos coming, and the professor explaining to a layman like me and to others. We're experts watching as well, and trying to think about the role of music in giving us hope and being even some healing at this very difficult time. I want to ask you, Professor, at the times when some of these classical heroes were doing their work, were they going under difficulties themselves? Were they in times of crisis too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing we forget about this pandemic is that this pandemic isn't new. Infectious disease is something that was very, very normal in the 19th century, in the 18th century, all the way back. And so people like Beethoven or Schubert, I mean, they literally suffered infectious diseases and were in fear of infectious diseases all the time. So this theme runs through music in many different ways. I did one video on Schubert, who himself died of an infectious disease, and he knew he was going to die. And so when you listen to his music, you can almost hear that kind of foreboding and an attempt to come to terms with the consequence of infectious disease. And in this particular Beethoven piece, of course, he suffered greatly, I mean, not only with deafness, but he himself was often very ill. And this particular piece has moments where he is almost in a state of losing his life, losing breath. The music actually says that he's exhausted and he's running out of breath. And it's a kind of lament. But what I want to point out about this music is that even though the music is about lamenting and suffering and isolation, we want to listen to it. In other words, this music is extremely beautiful, and that also creates a kind of tension. So even though it's about something that is very depressing and sad, the music points to something that is very beautiful. In other words, there's something that is transcendent. So even when there is suffering, even when you are in those dark, dark moments, the beauty in the music always is transcendent. It always points to something beyond. That's why I think in music, there is always a sense of hope.
Mark says there's great music from Durham, North Carolina. We have rich blues and jazz tradition, and what my friend Larry calls American classical music. Talk about American music and its influence on the world, please.
Me? Not my area, but yeah, no. Of course, America has its own group of composers, particularly in the 20th century. I mean, Aaron Copland would be a kind of representative, but it's a kind of very fraught issue, actually, in America. What constitutes American music? Who gets to have that voice? What kind of scenery, if you like, expresses what it means to be American? And what does it mean if I appropriate, this music and that music from other native groups? So what does it mean when I do that, right? So I think these are some of the thought questions about American music. And even if you go back into the 19th century, you have to remember Dvorak visiting America and writing his New World Symphony and taking music from the Native Americans and putting it there. So he's already beginning to ask questions about what does it mean to write American music. And of course, jazz is the other interesting idiom that really influenced the entire world, and that begins to seep in to classical music, not just in America, but across the world. So even in the early 20th century, already in Paris, people were really working on incorporating elements of jazz, maybe not really understanding it in its fullest form, but in a way, blues and jazz is the quintessentially American music and probably the most influential if you follow its history.
Well, William Lai says, watching from Hanover, was once in the professor's class. Could Wagner music be called healing?
Maybe Parsifal. Wagner also is a tricky composer because of his links with fascism and his hatred, his anti-Semitism. And he's a very complex personality. I always say about Wagner, he wrote 10 volumes about himself. This is not just the music, this is just writing. So you should always write as little as possible about Wagner. But yeah, no, I think music can be healing, and it doesn't really matter who the composer is, because sometimes we think that music is about the content of what is what it expresses. But music is more than just that content. The music is about creating structures, rhythmic structures, and these rhythmic structures are a way of weaving experiences of time. And the wonderful thing about human beings, and a very unusual trait that we have, is that we have this thing called entrainment, which basically means that we tap our feet to rhythm. No other species really does this. You might find an occasional parrot that might be able to nod its head to rock music, but you won't find two parrots that will do that at the same time. And because we have this thing called entrainment, we're actually able to share our experiences of music with one another. We can actually share this time. I can say, oh, this is Beethoven's piano sonata. Let's listen together. And we can share that experience of time together. Or I can be improvising jazz, and you can be improvising with me. We're sharing that experience of time together. So in a way, music is always healing in some sense, because music is never socially isolated. It's always a relational thing. And every time you're in relation with someone, you're in dialogue with someone, you're connecting with someone, I think there are elements of healing being negotiated if you're making good music together.
That's great. So we have a question from Shani. Shani Chandelier says, hello, professors. Thank you for organizing this. Good to see Professor Chua and your discussion on music. I'm an HKU student who loves attending the HKU Muse concerts. I wanted to ask if you can throw some light on the music of Johann Hummel and the influence of these great composers like Mozart, Beethoven on his music.
Hummel, yes. Well, he's one of these composers that kind of get missed out, right? So we talk about Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, but Hummel, who was also a great pianist, sort of gets kind of sidelined in many ways, even though people like Schumann and were playing Hummel and so on. So I don't really have a lot of kind of throw light on Hummel's music, except that I think we should really listen to all this music. He was certainly influenced by Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, and was in fact involved in some of Beethoven's compositional processes. If you look at people like him and other pianists like Thalberg, they were very important in developing a 19th century piano playing style that was in fact to change the way we understand piano music, and the birth of the piano recital, because even in Beethoven's time, nobody would give a recital of just piano music. But then we began to have these sort of virtuoso pianists with a very different kind of technique that would then result in people like, in fact, Schumann and Liszt and Brahms and so on, writing great piano music that involved much more virtuosic work, that involved a lot of moving around of the arms and hands that didn't really happen much earlier on in the 19th century.
Terry Lum says, hi, Daniel. And we have people watching from all over. Olinda says, name a favorite Beethoven sonata.
Favorite? Oh, well, apart from Opus 110, which I talked about in the video, there's Opus 109, which is another one of my favorites, which is the one just previous to that in E major. This is a music that begins to go off into a kind of, I don't know how to describe it, a kind of sort of a world of texture and a sort of just filigree, where it seems as if Beethoven is just playing around with kind of conventional figures, but somehow he imbues all this very conventional stuff like trills and arpeggios with a great deal of meaning. And I don't know how he does it, but he does it. And it's the most profound music you can imagine. And in that sonata, Opus 109 that I've just mentioned, the variation movement at the end, it sort of strips the theme away into the most extraordinary, sort of dazzling sort of fireworks of these filigree things. And then you think, wow, can it get any better than this? And then the theme comes back, this hymn, and you get the most incredible sense of stillness. And I guess, if you're talking about peace and healing, in that moment, you really feel as if you've arrived home. You really feel as if you've arrived at a moment where you can be at rest. It's a great piece of music. I recommend it to everyone.
Yes, you clearly are a fan, and we love seeing that. We have another video we're going to play now, so tell us what this is.
This is also from the same video about Opus 110, that A-flat major piano sonata. And I think it's really about how Beethoven, when you compose music, you are actually composing time. And you can compose time that rushes by you. It's very self-determined time. It doesn't really care about you. Just zoom. Or you can compose music that creates a huge sense of time, of invitation. And my point here is that this music is really about friendship and love, because love is a 4-letter word spelled Time. And time is always something that we can give as human beings. And what Beethoven is doing here is giving time. He's saying, look, I want to create as much space, breathing space, as much time as possible, because I want to welcome you into this sonata. And that's really what this bit of the video is about.
So Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 110 is about the redemption of breathing. If you don't believe me, Beethoven says it himself in the very last section of the sonata. He says that the music is reviving little by little. The music breathes in new life. So ultimately, despite the suffocating lament, this music is about hope. It is about life after despair. The music keeps on giving, and it never gives up.
Wow, that was really nice. And the fact that you put that together yourself is really cool. We have several questions coming in, and I'm going to try and kind of wrap a couple of them together. Lisa asked about how to make classical music more approachable. Mark asked, how do we make sure that there are people who aren't known that should be known? So if you have any suggestions for composers, we can look up on our Spotify or Pandora or one of those channels, or YouTube, of course. So maybe you can answer those questions.
I think classical music can be more approachable if we talk about it a little bit more, and not expect people just to sit quietly in an audience. It can be very, very intimidating just to turn up in a concert hall and be expected to, that you should just sit there in silence, that you should know what you should be doing, because actually people don't. And sometimes they don't know how to listen to this music because nobody's sort of tried to help them. One thing I try to get people to do, particularly musicians that we invite to Hong Kong U, is for them to talk about how they perform this piece of music. So we have a great music and in words series where the musicians actually talk about these pieces before they play, and that really helps people get into classical music. And of course, if we really want to open out to the field to lesser known composers, I think we have to start programming these composers in context with the more famous names. So we get a good balance of these sort of canonic works that we know so well, and what would in fact be a lot of new music from the past.
Can you comment on this photograph, this image that we're looking at right now?
Well, this is from the autograph score of Beethoven's Opus 110 from the video, and it's an extraordinary moment where the music is about to die. It feels like Beethoven is giving himself the last rites, and instead of landing on this minor depressing chord, he suddenly lands on this G major chord. But the funny thing about it, if you look at the image, is that chord is on the upbeat. So it keeps repeating itself on the upbeat. It repeats itself many, many times, and the pedal is down, so it gets louder and louder. So it's as if Beethoven is doing this. He's breathing in, he's breathing in, he's breathing in, he's breathing in, and then he breathes out. And then when he breathes out, he has this enormous phrase. It's a fugue that leads all the way to the end of the movement, at the end of the sonata. And it's one of the most amazing, triumphant, joyful, life-affirming moments you can imagine in music, a music that is a very affirmative, very healing in the sense that it gives you a sense of what life should be like after all that sort of lament and suffocation in the middle of this particular sonata.
Professor, it's 9:47 in Hong Kong right now. Do you have a few more minutes that we can continue the conversation? Okay, so we've been asked to repeat, if you will, the particular pieces of music you were talking about. We know we had Opus 110, but just, people are joining us all the time from around the world, so they're just kind of diving into this conversation.
Well, I've been speaking about Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 110. I also talked about the previous sonata just now, Opus 109 in E major, particularly the last movement, but the whole sonata is amazing. And then we talked about, I can't remember whether we talked about other things, but I talked about things that I particularly enjoy, like Mozart piano concertos. If you're looking for one that is one of my favorites, is the A major piano concerto K488. I think that one is the perfect Mozart piano concerto. Maybe I should give you a list of all the perfect music in the world that I love. It includes
Do you have a Spotify playlist or a YouTube playlist? We would love to have that. We'll talk to our friends at the university to create the Daniel Chua playlist for Spotify. People would go crazy to get that for sure. We also have an image of Beethoven, and I have a question about Beethoven as we show you. Look at that image. First of all, tell us what you see when you look at this photo. The painting, I'm sorry.
This is the very famous portrait of Beethoven that was done in his lifetime. He's actually holding if you see the whole painting, a score of his great mass, the Missa Solemnis. And this is a very Beethoven kind of look. This is supposed to be the eyes that look up to the heavens, but you can see that that kind of very furrowed brow. And we often think of Beethoven as a person with this kind of what I call this kind of stare, this kind of heavy, furrowed, very, very serious look. But I always think that actually it's the wrong image of Beethoven. That he's really not a person that always has that very serious, heroic kind of look. But he's actually a composer of great tenderness, and one of the most a composer that really knows how to get across the idea of love and friendship. So I'm always championing a different view of Beethoven, not always that very macho, heroic Beethoven, but a Beethoven that is much more broken, much more fragile, much more vulnerable, and a Beethoven that really speaks, I think, far more in this time of COVID-19 than that very sort of kind of heroic figure that sort of just bashes through everything, because I think that is not the right approach in this time of pandemic and protest, but a figure that really has learned how to be humble, how to listen, and how to love.
Wow, so special. Thank you for sharing this. I'm sure you want to say hello to Helen Wu. She's the past music librarian of HKU from Toronto. I have time to play the piano, sing, and listen to classical vocal music more during the pandemic to cheer myself up.
Well, that's a very good thing to do. I've been doing the same.
What's on your personal? You have an iPod. Do you have an iPhone that you listen to music, or do you only listen with the best, big stereo system? Can you talk about that?
I love big stereo systems. Well, the music I've been listening to lately, the Waltz from Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings. I think that's one of the most perfect pieces ever written. It always brings a smile on my face. Elgar's Introduction and Allegro for Strings, also an amazing piece that always I just love so much. I listen to a lot of Mozart, a lot of Beethoven, but also, I sometimes really Opus speaks to me at this time as well. But yeah, I should really get a list really of songs. Daniel Chua's song list.
I would love that. Minnie says, thank you so much, Professor. I wish I could listen to your music and lecture face to face. Thank you so much, Sree, for bringing us so many great live shows. Well, it's all because of the University of Hong Kong has brought us together and has this idea that at this time we can all learn from each other, that kind of global message. Do you have space in your library for modern music, current music, hip hop, other kinds of music?
Oh, absolutely. We have we cover all that, actually. I think, as I said, musicology is not about classical music. Musicology is about all music, and we need to understand that we need to really delve into all these different aspects now in order to get a really broad view of what music is, what it does, the cultural work that it does, and why it means so much to us, and why it's something that really brings a sense of both joy and healing, and really helps us to think about some of the deeper questions, particularly at a time like this.
Look at all these great comments. Lisa says, thank you both. We had someone talk about how they are enjoying you talking about listening, which I thought was very interesting concept, that you're talking about listening. And we would love to think about a way where we could watch you play in a future episode, maybe. My dad says the professor characterized many musicians as amazing. In reality, the professor is amazing. I have never enjoyed a talk on Western music so much. So that's high praise coming from my father, retired diplomat and author himself. He's at Sreeniv on Twitter, Sreeniv. I'm at Sree on Twitter. We've got to get the professor on Twitter, on Facebook, but he has no time because he is thinking about how to not just teach his classes, but folks, you also heard that he's the president of the International Musicology Association, which brings together musicologists from around the world. Their next big event is in 2022 in Athens, and I know it'll be a big party, especially after everything we've gone through all over the world. Professor, before we let you go, we want to show your book jackets so that people who want to hear you can also read you and learn more about you. So talk about each of these three books, please.
All right, so the Glisten Quartets of Beethoven, I think you need to be interested in the notes. This is a very music analytical book, but it's about the late quartets of Beethoven. If you don't know the late quartets of Beethoven, you must get to know them. The most amazing music. Absolute Music and the Construction and Meaning is a really fun book written in, I think, 35 very short chapters, full of puns, very lighthearted, but asking some very deep questions about why Western music is as it is, why we listen to Western music in this way and what it means. And the book Beethoven and Freedom is trying to talk about in what sense does Beethoven's music reflect the notion of freedom, because we always associate Beethoven with revolutionary freedom, but there's much more to Beethoven than just revolutionary heroics, and I wanted to get that across in that book. Also, if I may, if you want to check out the International Musicological Society's brain food, as we call it, there is a brainful with my videos on it. And we've also welcomed other musicologists to send in their videos on music in this time of COVID-19. And also you can check out the Hong Kong U Muse website as well, which is where we have our concerts. And there are many videos there with me and other colleagues of mine talking to great musicians about their performances. So if you want to find out more about classical music, those are the places to go.
We also had in this series of global conversations, we had a COVID cadenza that we did with students of the University of Hong Kong. It was amazing to see that. Talk about your students if you can. Give a shout out to them. And
we have the most amazing students, because music students are always just amazing in general. But they've had a hard time because they've had to. It's not easy to teach music online, particularly when you need a lot of interaction. So they've been working really hard and trying to get around all these difficult problems. But we have some great performers. You heard them in the COVID cadenza online broadcast. You heard some very virtuoso performers. And we like to mix, we don't really make a distinction, actually, between Western music and Chinese music and so on. It's all music, and we want that. And in our curriculum, we just said, it's just all music. We study this together. We try not to make the barriers between things. So we have very wonderful musicians playing both Western and Chinese instruments, as you can see here.
And this was on April 23rd, so people can go back in the archives and find them all there. It was just so well done, and your students were very, very impressive. So we want to say thank you very much to our professor, Daniel Chua. I'm going to reintroduce you, Professor, because people come towards the end. There's an odd thing that happens in the digital world that, when you're on TV and things, they don't do that. But I'll just, for people who are joining us now, Professor Chua is the Chair Professor of Music and the Mr. and Mrs. Hung Hing Ying Professor in the Arts at the University of Hong Kong. And he's the President of the International Musicology Society, a global association of researchers in all aspects of music, founded in 1927. And he has a PhD in musicology at Cambridge, and he has taught at lots of leading institutions, including Cambridge, King's College London, Yale, and at Harvard. And we also heard Duke and other places as well. If you enjoyed this series, please let us know. Please write to us. Please share your comments. You can see information right on the website. The website is fightcovid19.hku.hk. We love hearing your feedback. My email is sree@sree.net, sree@sree.net. Feel free to tweet me also if you have any questions @Sree. And I just want to say, because I have a daily program we do, Professor, we have one of your colleagues joining us who we already had on the HKU series. We're joined by Professor Keiji Fukuda, who will be here. And I know you know the great work of the HKU medical colleagues, and we are going to be talking to him about a lot of the headlines that you are seeing, including the issues around the pulling out of America from the WHO. He has served as a senior exec at WHO and the CDC, and he's your colleague. Do you all have chair meetings and things like that on Zoom? What are those like?
Well, I think KJ, I will be having dinner with him, I think, on Saturday or something. Okay. So I can talk to him about his performance on your program. Yeah.
That's right. We can, and you can both compare notes on how terrible a host you had on this. So,
no, you're wonderful, Sree, and I hope you keep safe and healthy, and everything goes well in New York.
Yeah, and we are seeing right on Twitter. Please go to news.hku.hk after this broadcast. Make sure you check that out. I think that's something that's really important. And with so many other questions, we're sorry we didn't get to them. Normally, Professor, I say to my guests, please go into your Facebook and answer those questions. I don't have to say that to you because you are Facebook free and Twitter free.
That's horrible at Facebook.
All right, we're going to say goodbye. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us. This has been an amazing hour. I learned so much, and I'm going to be pulling out my iPhone, getting onto Spotify, and playing some of those songs. And I hope everyone we'll think about the power of healing, of music at this moment. There are lots of other issues, obviously, in the world right now, but we're very grateful to Professor Daniel Chua for being with us and the University of Hong Kong for bringing us all together at this moment all over the world. Thank you very much, Professor.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Folks, you've been listening to Music for Hope and Healing from our Live from Hong Kong series, Learn from HKU Experts about the COVID-19 pandemic. And our guest was Professor Daniel Chua, Chair Professor of Music. And please follow us at HKU100 on Facebook, at HK University on Twitter, and also fightcovid19.hku.hk. Thank you very much and see you again soon. Goodbye.